I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the 4 critical steps for evolving your FinOps program. Our speakers today are William Norton, our Director of MSP and CSP Practice, and Peter Easler, Sales Engineer and Cost SME. I want to remind everyone, for questions, please put them in our chat, or you can put it in the Q&A box. And we are offering a demo promotion today. So if you're interested in receiving a demo of what Peter will be showing you later in the webinar, we're offering a $75 Amazon gift card. And will mention that at the end as well. And we will send out a link to that, as well as the recording of this webinar after. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Will.
All right, thanks, Elaine. Hey, everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to be discussing kind of 4 critical steps that CloudBolt recommends for evolving your FinOps program in 2023. I think it's safe to say at this point that the phrase FinOps has kind of shifted from the nice to have nature from a few years ago to more and more we're seeing it be a need to have in a lot of businesses. And so we want to bring our expertise and what we're learning in the market to this audience and talk a little bit about some tips and best practices to think about as you're planning your year in FinOps. So first, a little bit about the presenters here. My name is Will Norton. As Elaine mentioned, I'm the Director of the Service Provider Practice here at CloudBolt. So any MSP, CSP, or GSI who's using our platforms to deliver value to their clients, I oversee that program. In a lot of ways, we do have partners that are using the CloudBolt platforms for FinOps solutions that they have in market. I'm joined by Peter, who's going to be leading us in some of our demonstration later. He is a cost management subject matter expert and a sales engineer here at CloudBolt. Peter and I actually come from the same background. So we, prior to CloudBolt, we actually worked in a consulting practice. We were at kind of larger global GSIs delivering solutions at scale. We also both worked at a smaller Azure public cloud focused consultancy based in the United States. Peter and me actually launched a FinOps solution to market together probably before FinOps was a common phrase or term. So we actually had a public cloud cost management solution that we brought to market, and the evolution of that led to leading projects that were Fortune 150 and even 10 clients on their cost optimization journey. So we have a lot of experience in the field, and then on the other side of the fence, we work with our clients and partners now to help them use solutions like ours to just get range around their costs. So we bring a lot of subject matter expertise over the past 4 to 5 years. And then beyond just Peter and me, CloudBolt in general is heavily invested in the FinOps space. We are a partner member with the FinOps Foundation. And so as a partner member, we're heavily involved in the body of knowledge in the community. We have several certified practitioners here on staff. So if you engage with any of the experts here at CloudBolt, you're likely talking to somebody who has gone through the training and understands the FinOps framework. And our platforms are actually in the process right now of being certified as FinOps certified platforms. So not many vendors out there have that status, and it's something that we're very excited to get done this year. If you're a participant in the FinOps community, you've probably seen us, and you will continue to see us. We have planned engagements throughout the year, including the FinOps X conference that's upcoming this summer in San Diego. So let's start where I think most webinars are starting nowadays, and that's kind of zooming out and looking at, hey, what should we expect this year from a perspective of goals and objectives in business. And I think what we all can agree on is that the uncertain landscape is certainly steering business goals and objectives. January and February are always the time to build your plans and your strategies and your bets, and really understand kind of the themes of the calendar year to come. And in all of the engagements that we have, both at leadership levels and then all throughout the organization, no matter what business unit we're talking to, what we're finding is that the emphasis this year is going to be increasing efficiency and optimizing spend. And that's pervasive. That's not just in the IT parts of the organization. When we talk about just the CIOs and the tech executives, this is really a trend that has not changed over the past few years. What CIOs and tech executives expect out of their bottom line returns for digital investments, including the public cloud, you see that these goals are pretty constant over the past few years. CIOs want to improve the operational excellence of their business, increase employee productivity, increase cost efficiencies, and improve the overall employee experience. So that really hasn't changed. What will change this year is that there's going to be higher stakes, where this was maybe a focal lens of procurement and thinking about digital investments in the past. There's going to be a lot more scrutiny and focus on that this year in the tech space. And so we click in a little bit further, we have to ask the question, what does this mean for cloud operations specifically? And while we can't predict the future, what we know based on everything that we're seeing is kind of three main themes. The first is that there will be continued investment in the public cloud. So adoption is going to continue, but the overall hyperscaler growth may slow. And so, if you look at IT spending last year, it grew 5.9% year over year. The expectation this year is actually going to go up even further to 6.3%. And according to all the studies that are out there right now, Gartner had a recent one that said about 80% of CFOs are signaling we're going to increase or maintain our digital investment in 2023, regardless of any sort of inflation or economic uncertainty. And so the investment in public cloud has been named as a constant for this year, though the focus is going to turn very quickly for companies into rationalizing, auditing investments, reducing waste, and increasing efficiency. For those of you who listen to Microsoft's public earnings, it's something I've done for about 10 to 12 years now, having worked there for a major part of my career. It was the first time I had ever heard the senior leadership actually talking out loud about cloud optimization. In fact, the Q&A session, Satya spent a lot of time talking about his expectation that enterprises are going to be reducing their cloud and optimizing it to make sure that they're getting the most out of their investment. So that's going to be a theme we see a lot of. And with that theme, we're going to see more FinOps capabilities and roles within business. Like I said in the beginning, this is shifting from a nice to have to more of a need to have very rapidly. And we see that out there. If you go to LinkedIn right now and type in the phrase FinOps on job roles, I found about 15,000 positions that have FinOps either in the title or the description. I don't think I could have said that 4 or 5 years ago. In fact, I don't even think I could have said that 12 months ago. And then you look at the FinOps Foundation and the community that's growing and expanding very quickly every single year. In fact, they have about 200 job postings where it's FinOps dedicated resources on their job board. So we're going to see FinOps scale, and it's going to rise to the ranks of the other operational components of cloud operations. But the nice part for these teams is that while the rest of the business is putting magnifying glass on efficiency and focusing on cost optimization, the common goals of a FinOps team are already aligned with the major themes of 2023. FinOps teams are already doing these things and already have the right way of thinking in the business. And so it complements the goals of this year really well. And I hate to distill an overall operational practice into 3 things, but I'm going to do my best. So don't comment at me. But if you think about what a FinOps team should be focused on at the highest level, it's really 3 things: increasing FinOps participation and activating a culture of cost ownership in your organization. It's facilitating that ongoing analysis and optimization of the cloud estate, so to reduce that spend. And then it's to introduce the proactive measures to govern and guard the company's cloud and protecting those bottom line expenditures proactively. These 3 goals at the highest level align really well with the trends that we're seeing across businesses. And so if you're in the FinOps space, whether you're a leader who's thinking about investing more in FinOps, or you're somebody who is a FinOps practitioner, or maybe you work adjacently to these roles in the business, what we want to focus on today is what are some things you should be thinking about early on in the calendar year to try to get that motion in your FinOps org, to be a success this year. And I have to start with the obvious one. Typically, I wouldn't do it, but this is something that all of the research tells me I have to call and put a spotlight on. And that is that you have to set clear objectives and KPIs for your FinOps program. I was shocked to learn that 50% of enterprises are signaling that they don't have clear success measurements for their cost management initiative. And so what we've recommended and some of the consulting we've done in the past is using something like an OKR framework, which is, essentially stands for objectives and key results. If you've not heard about that framework in the past, I'd certainly recommend just type it in Google, you'll find a lot. But it's a really great framework. It's definitely one that we see a lot in the FinOps space, and it drives clear and measurable goals. Think about your objectives in the OKR framework aligned to those top three goals, which are increasing participation, the analysis and optimization, and then those proactive measures. Try to align your key results and objectives to those three goals. We also recommend balancing financial, technical, and operational outcomes for your key results, and I'll show an example of that in a moment. And when you do create these OKRs, publish them publicly, get them up to your leaders, get them up to your teams, and at all levels, make sure that they're widely available so that everybody knows what the FinOps team is working on. And then publish your updates. Are you having success? Are you having setbacks and failures? Communicating that at a broad level is very important. And the final one that I don't see a lot of, but I think is really important is you can't go it alone. If you're a FinOps leader, you really need to be thinking about what do your stakeholders in the organization need, and how do I take those, compile them, and align them to my OKRs. You can't just build objectives and key results that don't, are not based off of the interviews of the people in your organization, or you're just not tracking in the right direction. So, I'll say before we move on to some examples, 43% of leaders have signaled that they achieved their cost saving targets in the first year. And then when you zoom out to about 3 years, only 11% signal that they're sustaining their cost optimization programs year on year. And so how do you get over that failure in those firefighting exercises? I think it's being very clear about what you want to achieve and working towards that. So here's some examples of objectives and key results, and we won't go through all of them, but if your objective is to improve cloud cost optimization, you might have a financial goal of achieving a 20% reduction in monthly cloud spend within the next quarter. You may have a more technical goal of introducing power schedules to 80% of your development virtual machines in the North America region within 6 months. If you're looking to enhance cloud cost visibility and ownership, you might think about more of a functional goal around researching and procuring a cost management platform, and then getting that out to the masses within your company to stimulate the growth there. So these are some examples, and obviously we'll send this presentation out afterwards if you'd like to look at these. But that OKR framework, time over time, seems to work really well in the FinOps space. Moving on to the next recommendation is really a frame of mind recommendation. I always think about this I Love Lucy skit, and if you've not seen it, it's the famous kind of chocolate factory scene where Lucy and her friend are trying to kind of wrap these chocolates, and they're doing a really great job in the beginning, and then as things scale and amplify, they just can't keep up. And too often when we meet with the FinOps leaders in the business, we kind of ask them, hey, what are you focused on? What's your role? What's your responsibility? And what we see is that they come back with answers like, we oversee all reporting, we create all reports, we're in charge of all optimization, we're the police of the business. Those kind of common answers, I just don't think that's the right tact. And really the recommendation here is if you try to do it all, you're going to fail. And so an alternative to that would be a business consultant in the FinOps space. So instead of focusing on trying to do everything for everyone, introduce and maintain rituals, tools, and communication, as well as policies and procedures, which we'll talk about next, that empower the business to adopt FinOps. So what are some ways of doing that? If you're working with your leadership teams, leveraging things like a CCOE, a Cloud Center of Excellence, and being a staple of those sessions where you're presenting the state of the financial health, talk about the KPIs, where are you winning, where are you losing? discuss the anti-patterns and trends within the business, and talk about success blockers. That's at the high level. And then at the lower levels, are you meeting with your cost owners regularly? Are you talking to them about their trends? Are you helping them set their own optimization goals? Are you removing blockers and enabling and training them? Are you acting as procurement for some of the tool sets that empower FinOps? All right, you should be looking and seeing what's out there, what makes sense. How do we adopt new technologies that, again, we can share with the rest of the organization and get them to be more involved? And then on the right-hand side, it's things like knowledge management. You have a repo like SharePoint or Confluence where you're keeping all of your FinOps architecture, processes, guides, and best practices. We'll talk about some of that in the next recommendation. Are you partnering with your L&D teams, your learning and development teams, to design content and sharing out best practices that come out all the time, right? Provider updates are happening, almost daily across Azure, AWS, and GCP. You need to keep up with that. You need to share it out, and then you need to bring insights to the organization so that everybody is as up to date, or at least somewhat as up to date as your team. And then be a marketer. I mean, that's the final one. If you have goals, like I said, publicly share them, give updates, and share those success stories. If you're finding success with a certain team or a certain business unit, or if you've saved a bunch of money, with a group of folks, take that, compile it, work with your marketing teams, and blast it out internally so you can share those success stories. And all of this is contributing to that overall focus on FinOps across the organization. So you're decentralizing a lot of the power, which is important. The next one is talking about architecture. So, we go and we talk to a lot of companies and we ask them very simple questions around accountability and the structure of cost as an architecture within the business. And what we find is that a lot of organizations do not have this well-defined. You ask them things around spending categories or questions around cost life cycles, tagging what's required and what's optional. We'll dive into these in a second, but if you don't have these well-defined, and if your team as the FinOps experts cannot answer the questions that are attached to these, I'm willing to bet that the teams that are actually developing and overseeing operations for the clouds will not be able to answer these questions as well. And what ends up happening is there's very little alignment on how costs should be managed and architected within the business. And usually that leads to the firefighting exercises because you're spending way too much money. So every organization is different, and there's no real guide to success, although there's plenty of best practices. But I would challenge that you should ask your team, your FinOps team, some of the questions that you see on this slide. And if you don't have a clear answer to these questions, and if you don't have a policy guideline or something to back up the answer, it's probably something you want to focus on this year and fix. So I'll throw out some of my favorites, but obviously take a look at all of them. When it comes to spending categories, do you have categorical definition, and is that publicly available as to what costs are associated with the different focuses in the business? How is each category of cost measured and reported to the business? When it comes to tagging, what cost allocation tags do you use? What's mandatory and what's optional? Where do we centralize our ownership models? Meaning, do you have a place where you store who owns what part of the budget? And that kind of leads itself into the chargeback models. What costs are charged back and where? Who pays for shared services and how do we manage that? What is the architecture of shared services? How do we distribute at the top level things like commitment-based discounts, reservations, savings plans, even credits that you may get? Do we distribute those down or do we centralize them at the top? And then moving on to things like cost life cycles. Do you have a set in stone cost life cycle? When does IT own the cost? When do the application owners or the business units or the project teams own the cost? And what is the life cycle of that cost? Very important. If production is on the business units, maybe pre-production like POC and dev is a cost that the IT business line receives and kind of oversees, but having that mapped out and shared is very, very important. And then things like what technologies are you allowed to use and not allowed to use, having those fly and no fly lists. What's in use right now? Where are we seeing a lot of success? Do we have preferable technologies when you make comparative statements against even just database types or storage types? Do you have a preferable technology and why? And then which technologies do we avoid? Too often we find organizations going all in on new PaaS services that they've never used before, and the ancillary cost to adopting that can be extreme. One, if you don't understand the cost architecture from a FinOps perspective, you can't proactively manage it. But two, if you don't have knowledge on it, you're going to have those outages and problems in the actual production environments, and those can lead to other costs that are going to affect the business. And then the last one is, how do we justify cost? What justification do we require for new cost? How do we calculate ROI and TCO categorically? And which unit metrics are feasible for each business line? I always find it so funny. I mean, I work in software now, and obviously I'm a part of sales there. The amount of questions that we receive from procurement teams for third-party technology, even for small investments, we're asked to provide a lot, a business case, an ROI, a TCO, all of this justification before a procurement team is willing to move forward. But I look back at my days in FinOps consulting, and Peter and I would see applications be spun up very quickly without the same scrutiny internally when they were built. And so thinking about those guardrails and acting like a procurement team is very important. But again, these are just some questions, but they're ones that you should use to dial in on, do we have a cost architecture that's well-defined and shared? Now let's go to the last one, and it's one of our favorites because it's become quite a trend recently. And that's automating governance as best as possible, using automation as a tool. Going back to number two, you can't do it all if you're a FinOps team. It's very important that you have well-defined policies around what is and is not allowed, and document your overall processes. But using things like guidelines, guardrails, and automation to back those policies is very important. You want to use automation when it's critical, when there's something that is high risk. How do you ensure that you're using automation to guard what's being done? Guidelines only go so far, and typically we hear from engineers and developers and FinOps teams that guidelines really are just that, and they're very, very rarely used. You can have automated guardrails in place, and that does help with the steering, but automation is what makes it possible at the end of the day for those high risk categories. So there's three areas we recommend thinking about for potentially going down the path of automation. The first is deploying and provisioning resources. And that is, how do you create automation or automated guardrails around standards, mechanisms, and requirements that go into the DevOps process, the pre-solution creation process, so that when you're provisioning and configuring, automatically what happens is that all the best practices that you desire as a FinOps team are in place. Examples from earlier in this presentation is, if you've got a tagging charter that has required tags, if you use automation or guardrails, there's no question as to whether or not those are going to be put in place. In fact, some of our tools actually will reach out to CMDB, pull the source of truth, and automatically apply them based on the user who's configuring. And even things like resource allowances, like what is able to be published and what's not able to be published. If you control the provisioning process, being able to introduce a new PaaS service that's never been used in the organization is not even an option. So that's definitely a place you want to think about it, because you're stopping the bleeding before it starts. And then when we talk about cost optimization, there are great tool sets out there. We'll show you some of this in our tool set that find and clean up unused resources automatically. So things like your idle resources and VMs, unattached IPs, snapshots, load balancers. You can do automatic cleanup of those resources. And then there's also automation around right sizing and auto scaling and a hub and bring your own license that's available, that takes what could have been back in a few years ago when Peter and I were doing this, could have been hours and hours and hours, and can automate it within minutes. And the last place that we recommend thinking about governance and automation is the overall resource lifecycle. So managing the availability and utilization of resources with policies. That can include things like power schedules. We see a lot of that, very popular. You're not paying for compute if something is not running. Resource life cycle. So when does storage move from hot to cold to archive storage, saving you money as it goes down? Things like decommissioning, so removing of resources that are no longer in use or that have run their cycle. And then state management, scaling, auto scaling and burst rules, and much more. These are three key areas that we recommend thinking about automation and governance, because they can do a lot of, they can have a lot of help across your organization in reducing costs. So that about sums up the 4 recommendations that we have for 2023. But we don't want to stop there, so we'll pause before we move on to a platform demonstration, which I know plenty are eager to see. We wanted to open it up, and Peter and me are on. Happy to take any questions around those 4, or even dial in to something that we may have glossed through. So if you do have a question, feel free to use that Q&A function or the chat function, and Elaine and I will monitor. Feel free to send them now. And Elaine, I know you've been monitoring. Let me know if there's anything that came directly to you.
Yeah, there is one question here, and I want to make sure this is for you, Will. How do you recommend managing and tagging across multiple public clouds and on-prem?
Yeah, so the hybrid metadata conversation comes up a lot. That's a really good question. What we typically recommend, or a best practice that we see better stated, is using a CMBD or a database as a source of truth for your cost allocation. And so however your cost architecture is configured, whether that be project IDs or cost centers or business units or even just people with names, setting up that database in a place like a CMBD, which typically is at the center of most IT operations, is the best practice, because we know that while the public clouds make it very easy to tag, some of the on-premise technology stacks don't actually have the same functionality. And then each one of the hyperscalers is different. So how Azure does things versus AWS may be a little bit similar, but GCP has a very different approach to their tagging. And so while you want to ensure that those are all clean and up to date, we definitely recommend not using any one cloud as the source of truth. Have those things defined in the CMDB, and then typically you can connect that to your VMware instances or whatever other technology you're using on-prem, and then with all the public clouds. And then going back to automation, if you have an automation tool for provisioning or for any sort of management, typically those will integrate with your ServiceNow instances or other. And so that source of truth can be used in the provisioning across on-prem and in the public cloud. So great question from whoever that came from. Any other questions that are coming through?
Not at the moment.
Okay, well, we'll keep this open. I know people are excited to see a demonstration, so we'll go ahead and move on. I'm going to let Peter take over in just a second, but today we're going to be talking at a high level about probably mostly our cost management platform. So for those who are new to CloudBolt, we have multiple solutions in market, and they all work really well together. As cost experts, we want to talk about some of the cost management functionality that CloudBolt has today. And so our cost platform, we're going to dive into that, talk about curating dashboards and some other really relevant things to today's discussion. And we may show some of our other capabilities as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let you share. Peter, see if you can take that from me. Let me know if it allows you.
Doesn't look like I can share yet.
Cool. See if you can try now. And here we go.
Looking good. All right. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for your time today. And as Will mentioned, we're going to do a quick high level dive into the CloudBolt cost and security management platform and how it relates to some of the FinOps principles and tasks that Will has covered. And when I'm reviewing the platform with customers, prospects, even our internal folks, I like to look at the platform as really an end-to-end FinOps enablement tool. So, that starts with, consolidating the cost associated with our workloads across, several different hyperscalers from AWS, Azure, GCP, VMware, enabling the business to curate and create dashboards, views, and scopes that are relevant to the end users, to the different business units, highlighting, our KPIs, our key metrics and forecasts across those clouds, and then enabling easy access to the potential savings, the identified idle, unused, unoptimized workloads that we have, and really pushing that informed stage and making it easy as possible to quickly access the views and the information that are kind of relevant to that FinOps process. So bringing it all together, linking to favorite reports, which are, frequently referred to and referenced over time, linking budgets, and then some different scorecard metrics like cost efficiency. We see enterprises and service providers that work with organizations who are looking to, drive their costs down, enable FinOps across the organization. There's no easy place to start, and understanding and having the ability to look beyond just total cost of an application or total potential savings, and seeing things like cost efficiency of an application, or, a tenant versus another tenant, really helps kind of prioritize where to start that process, where to begin, optimizing, reserving, and really managing spend. So the dashboards really brings it all together and enables and gets new users up to speed. All the different features, charts, widgets, graphs are drillable, and will take you into the different key features of the platform. With any cloud cost platform, our cost reporting engines typically going to be top of mind for any end user, and we'll bucket our costs into categories by hyperscaler and then by some of the frequent service types within those cloud providers. We'll enable dynamic grouping, filtering, date ranges. Everything can be set in stone and then again, referenced as we move forward. So those key reports like previous 6 months by business unit, by environment, by application, we don't need to come in and recreate those, per one cloud or per every cloud. We have them quickly available through the platform, and then we can share them directly to our different users, to our different tenants. So, that FinOps COE can create the standardized report with the filters, the dimensions, everything we need, and then share it out to the different tenants, which are, our business units for marketing, prod, non-prod. And when they access the reports, it'll be scoped to the costs within their accounts, their subscriptions or projects, and they can just quickly get that information. And then obviously the table view, the actual data that we're ingesting and acting upon, we want that to be quickly and intuitively available to users. So being able to customize that grid view of, cost by account, tag, region, product, meter, and then having the ability to look at different metrics like, beyond just cost, but utilization, quantity consumed, for service providers that may be, marking up their costs based on a certain percent or a fixed amount. They internally may want to track that against customers, or, enable their end customers to see that all in cloud cost. Or, if we have an overhead per, all of our computer, all of our marketplace charges that doesn't get factored into our cloud bill, but it is something that we're tracking, we can use CloudBolt to configure billing configurations so those margins and discounts can be kind of waterfalled down to the customers and utilized. The next piece of the puzzle is optimization. As we nail down the inform and the reporting phase, we want to easily be able to identify opportunities for savings and optimization across not just one cloud, but all our clouds. And CloudBolt really tackles that, beyond what you're going to get native, beyond some of the cookie cutter recommendations that you'll get from, Azure Advisor or AWS Trusted Advisor. We'll dig into a variety of different resource types and cover them in different categories. So we'll break them out into unused and unoptimized, where our unused are going to factor in some of the resources that have slipped through the crack, the idle, unattached, orphaned resources that We typically see enterprises cleaning up, once a year, once every 6 months. We want to quickly be able to identify those, drill into, maybe our low impact, like deleting unattached disks, volumes, snapshots, IPs, and then drill deeper into more kind of high impact, our expensive compute workloads that are, running idle and idles based on the thresholds that you set. So we can have thresholds for production environments, which may be, 10% for 3 weeks is idle, but a non-prod or a dev test is 5% for 14 days or something like that. And then it just eliminates that extra amount of investigation you need to do into a recommendation before you can really, take action on it and ensure it's being remediated and those savings are being captured. We can then go a step further and dive into and start to bucket our servers, our resources, our databases into categories for power scheduling, start, stop, business hours only, weekends only, things like that, and enabling our end users, our engineers, our optimizers to come in and start to identify those segments of resources, looking beyond just 7 or 14 days, or beyond just the average CPU or the average memory, and identifying where those power schedules may be applicable, bucketing them in, adding comments, beginning that workflow and that process, and then jumping right into the automation. So that's why I call, the CloudBolt platform truly end to end, is because a lot of different tools out there will give you some reporting, may give you some recommendations, but that's typically when we see the process stall. And the reason for that is there's not much consistency behind the scripting, the processes that go into really cleaning up and optimizing resources and a one-time approach, let alone on a regular basis. And the automation and the event scheduler with CloudBolt really looks to tackle that problem. So things like a regular once a week or once a month disk cleanup, where we're cleaning up our unattached disks, idle volumes or snapshots that haven't been touched in a certain amount of time. We can begin that process with a dry run, so we're not just turning it loose and letting the tool delete whatever it can find. We'll have a few dry runs so we get an idea of the resources that'll fall into those buckets. We'll narrow those down to specific accounts or business units, groups that we've created within CloudBolt, and then we'll begin to set up the event. So we're going to look at volumes and snapshots, and we're going to clean those up on a once a month basis. We can narrow that down further by tags, and that kind of opens up a whole nother world of use cases for the event scheduler, where you can have non-impact events, but they're scanning for incorrect or missing tags on a regular basis. We can have additional conditions, related to those service advisor thresholds, where this event's not going to delete or terminate anything unless it's been idle or unattached for more than 7 days or 14 days with less than a certain amount of IOPS in or out, or a certain amount of CPU or memory. We can obviously set up the notifications. We'll allow opt-outs. So if we have, a resource owner tag that's on a majority of our resources, we can send them a notification up to 7 days in advance. We can use that tag key, append an organizational domain to the tag value, so that resource owner is notified that their disk or their volume has fallen into this event. It's going to be deleted, and if they want to opt out, they'll have that ability. And then the really critical piece of it is the regularity of it. As I mentioned, we would see organizations once every 6 months, push all their applications to go delete their unattached or their idle resources. 6 months later, their costs were right back where they started. And not only the repetitiveness of it, but the time saved for those engineers to focus more on things like, modernization or moving to those PaaS-based serverless areas that everybody is talking about. Not having to worry about things like this typically makes that a lot easier. So we'll set this event up to start on the 15th of February. We'll have it run at noon, send a notification out to, our analysts, our ops team, our engineering manager, or to specific users or emails that may be not loaded into the platform yet. And then we'll set that event up to run. We'll have it end after, we'll say 24 occurrences. So it'll run for 2 years, and there we go. We've got that event, that action that typically took 2 or 3 days worth of effort for our engineers to clean that up across the organization is now happening behind the scenes, and we can get those results, track those savings, report on them, and really tie the whole process together. And the last thing I'll show is a really neat feature that I think is relevant for our service providers and for our enterprises that are looking to spur that information flow to their business units or their customers, their application owners, without requiring analysts or FinOps teams to go cloud by cloud, cost platform by cost platform, taking screenshots and running Excel exports and putting everything together. So we created a feature called Export Reports. It's essentially a FinOps 12-month summary that can be generated with 1 or 2 clicks across different cloud environments, business units, or workloads, depending on the tenant and the scope of the user who's logged in. We can narrow that down to different billing accounts within the cloud provider and ensure the metric that the report is based on is the correct metric. And then some examples of what those look like are the Excel version. We're going to provide a high-level cost overview with our top 10s across services accounts, highlighting some of those scorecard metrics, drilling into the top 10s across services and accounts for analysis on our cost drivers, what's changing month over month, and then pushing our savings opportunities to those end users to kind of spur them into really working with the platform to start to action them, putting this all together for a QBR, for a monthly business review, or an executive readout. There's a lot of potential for it, and we feel that it removes a lot of the legwork and kind of grunt work that goes into building these out. And Will and I know that intimately as we came from a managed service and professional service world where we're working for customers that are driving FinOps, and we need to report and understand the process and the information we're looking to push out.
Yeah, countless hours spent with screenshots and disparate reports trying to put together a PowerPoint. Gotta love that this can be done with one button in the modern age. Peter, great job. I've got some questions on the side for you, so I'll go through them. James asked, is there a way to hook budgeting software to show views against actuals? And I think that probably lends itself to the API conversation where, how maybe a budget software can be an input to the budgets that we have in our platform, but then the actuals can be an output into budgeting software. So do you want to talk briefly about the API that we have?
Absolutely. That's a great question and was a big point of emphasis in my previous life and in my current life as to, how can we customize this to match the business needs? And to the question around how, can we use our predefined budgets listed in this table or this database and feed that into the platform to get that quick and automated analysis on our cost versus those budgets. And the CloudBolt cost platform APIs are about as user-friendly and intuitive as anything I've seen in the market. And I say that as someone who's spent way more hours than I'd like to admit building out Power BI and different data models using those endpoints from different tools, including CloudBolts. So anything we can generate, report on, create, initiate from, natively from the CloudBolt platform, we can automate through the APIs. So that could be hooking into, a table and feeding budget information per account, loading users in, generating export reports or creating tenants, running billing, invoicing through the platform. After we get those margins, discounts, markups all loaded in, we can pull them through the API into, our invoicing or our payment platform if that's something that's required. But long story short, yes, we can feed in budget information and then start to report on that in a variety of different methods through the platform.
Yeah, so enterprise FinOps teams are using this, exactly in the way that you're asking, James. And I think, automating some of the setup to introduce new cost centers, new projects, all that, dashboards can be built automatically, users can be onboarded automatically, all that stuff. So the fact that our APIs match the functionality of the platform really makes the automation components infinite. There's one more, Peter, and it's a two-part question. I think I kind of know the answers, but I'll let you jump on me. So for the report shown in the demo on inform, operate, and And so against all the phases, essentially, are these reports available out of the box, or do you have to build each report and dashboard separately?
Yeah, good question. So depending on the user who's logged in, the permissions they have, the clouds, the CSPs that are associated with those permissions, there's a set of out-of-the-box dashboards and reports that they'll have access to. So for an organization that's across all four, we'll have a variety of different combinations of dashboards and views based on those cloud connections. And then drilling into the cost reporting, there'll be a set of out-of-the-box favorite reports covering some of the more frequent things we've come across. And then there'll be bucketed out-of-the-box compute, storage, database, usage type reports. So you won't have to go and create those for each CSP. They'll be readily available, and then the schedule and sharing can be set up on that going forward. Yep.
I think the other thing I'll comment on there is that, as a part of our onboarding and implementation, when we have new customers, is that we will help you build the reports that make sense for your business. So it's a part of the onboarding program, and we're proud to say that we're a partner in the setup of the platform instead of just handing over the keys. So the second question, and probably the final one, Peter, for you, is if we have multiple CSP, are these reports consolidated as one view across all CSPs, or do we have to build them out for each separately? Probably a multi-part question, but do you want to take that one?
Yeah, as it stands now, for our multi-cloud environments, the dashboards is really where we're going to have that single pane of glass view into the spend across those CSPs. In terms of the actual cost reporting engine, they are broken out by CSP as it stands currently. There will still be out-of-the-box reports covering some of those kind of frequent reports that we see customers making. And I'll kind of hint to some of the roadmap items that are coming this quarter and the first half of this year. And one of the biggest ones is the ability to have a consolidated view of all of our costs across CSPs in one cost report. So mapping things like EC2, Azure VMs, GCP compute engines into one category, and kind of enabling that reporting across different clouds, and enabling a little bit of kind of more granular analysis about or on those reports.
Okay. Thank you so much, Peter. We have one more question from Akash that I can take. Can you talk about the licensing model for all these features? I think what you'll find is that our licensing model is pretty straightforward, but we probably like to have those conversations one-on-one. So Akash, feel free to reach out to me or use that demonstration button, and we can connect with somebody to talk about the pricing models that we have. You'll find that we're fairly flexible in that regard. So definitely book that conversation. And that's a good kind of segue into the next thing, was just a reminder that, hey, anybody that was on this session today, please take a moment. We have multiple solutions out there. You saw, let's say, a high-level overview of our cost management platform. Would love to show our cost management platform that can kind of help in the deployment, provisioning, and day two operations. On the governance and guardrail side, we're offering $75 gift card for anyone who responds back to that email that we'll send out. So please take advantage of that. Looking forward to having a continued conversation. And then we'll just wrap up by thanking everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day. I know there's a lot of content out there. There's a lot of different webinars and sessions. We hope this was valuable, and we will make this recording and presentation available as soon as the end of the day. I would definitely appreciate everybody joining. And if you have any follow-up questions, we'd love to have those conversations directly with your team, and we can spin off and talk one-to-one. So, all right. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.